This is Uncommon Sense for Leaders, a forum for exploring leadership from the intellect, the heart, and the spirit. Whether you're a leader now or aspire to be a leader in the future, you owe it to yourself to learn about the big ideas that have shaped the careers of compelling communicators, masters of influence, and highly effective leaders. Uncommon Sense for Leaders. Tune in to hear thought-provoking ideas on every aspect of leadership. You can expect dynamic discussions with special guests, quick tips you can apply immediately for better results, and the tools you need to take you from where you are to where you want to be as a leader. Are you ready to crack the code for achieving unprecedented results? Then welcome the host of Uncommon Sense for Leaders, Catherine Carlisi.
Hello and welcome to Uncommon Sense for Leaders. Today I am very happy to welcome back a former guest, David O'Brien. David, you may remember, is the president of Work Choice Solutions, and he's come with us today. He's joining us today to talk about a topic that is really hot in business today. We talk about it all the time, and that's accountability. What is it? How do we get it? And how can our attempts to create an accountable work environment go astray? So first, let me remind you actually a little bit about David and his background. So he started Work Choice Solutions in 2000, and he's a human resources and organizational development consultant, has been for about 25 years, so I'm going to say he knows his stuff. His industries include manufacturing, healthcare, and financial services. So some of the people that he does, some of the organizations he does leadership and team effectiveness work with. So that's training, coaching, and consulting. Listen to this lineup of clients. I'm just going to read it to you. Aetna, Allied World, Avery Dennison, Connecticut, CNC Software, Dow Chemical, ESPN, KPMG, Mass Mutual, MetLife, Otis Elevator, People's Bank, St. Mary's Hospital, the Hartford, the Mohegan Tribe, Travelers, and United Technologies. So obviously, people know about David's talent, and we are so fortunate to have you with us today, David. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Catherine. It's so nice to be back on your show. Thank you for that very kind introduction. As I listen to that, I realize how fortunate I am to be able to do the work I do with the types of folks that I work with, and of course to be part of this show again on our show today. So thank you very much. It's great to be back.
Well, you're very welcome. And this is a topic that you actually suggested, because I think it's come up a lot in your work with clients. So from what you're seeing, how has the focus on this topic increased over the last year?
Yeah, good question. It has. I've seen it in more and more cases, in more and more conversations, and I think that it's driven by a number of factors, but I think one of them is really about the drive for greater efficiency. And I see that in my conversations. I hear that in my conversations with leaders, with teams, with organizations in all different sectors. And I think it's a lot of it's driven by the fact this greater drive for efficiency. And as I'm sure you see in your work as well, regardless of the industry, more and more organizations today have that drive for greater efficiency, doing more with less kind of thing.
Right. And so how does accountability fit into that? If you were going to describe it in one word, what would it be?
Well, I think it's leadership. And, you know how I'm very partial to that. That's the centerpiece of my work. And as you remember from our last conversation and the last show, and if there are listeners who are on again today that remember that, I talked about leadership. One of the great lessons of leadership is that it's not limited to our work. We can be leaders in every role we play. And when I think about accountability, I think, to your point or question, in one word, what is it? It's leadership. It's personal leadership. It's leadership in every role that we play. I think it starts with that. But I also think, I think awareness is another important word to consider, and that awareness is about what is my level of accountability? How am I demonstrating accountability? What value does it create for me? What value does it create for my various stakeholders? So I think the first word really is about leadership and awareness and ownership, of course, I think is another word that comes to mind.
So a few days ago, I was reading a blog by Marcia Zidle, Zidle. She's a board-certified coach who works with CEOs and executives. And she wrote an article about accountability. And tell me what you think about this. She says that a simple definition of accountability is a personal sense of responsibility for the outcomes of what they do. People look beyond their narrow job descriptions and focus on the results that their work is contributing to. When they adopt a sense of accountability, they recognize that their participation can and will make a difference. They go the extra mile because they know what to do, why they need to do it, and why it's important. So I think it's very similar to what you're saying, but I don't think that people always think of themselves as a leader if they don't have people reporting to them. And sometimes maybe expanding that definition of leadership to suggest that everyone can be a leader wherever they sit in the organization.
Sure, and wherever they are in life, by the way. And I think, I've often, as you know, in my work, I do a lot of speaking work at conferences and so forth, and I'm often asked, okay, well, you've been doing this for 25 or 30 years, you've probably learned a few things about leadership. What's your most important lesson, or what are your top 3 lessons? And clearly, I believe and I have believed this for a long time, the most important lesson I've learned is that it's not limited to one space in our life. It's not limited to work. It's really in many ways, and this is a deeply rooted belief and conviction that I've held for a long time, and that is that leadership is a choice. It's a choice we make, and it is taking that responsibility, and I think that's the correlation to the personal leadership, the personal accountability, that says it's up to me and that I own this and I take responsibility. And I really liked her definition. I think that was terrific. It's a great guidepost for all of us. And I believe that it starts with that accountability, that personal accountability or leadership, and acknowledging what value do I create. So much of this is about what value do we create. And I think I've shared with you in my work, I use leadership quotes a lot to illustrate some of the lessons and to get conversations started. And I'm reminded of one from Lou Gerstner, who used to be the CEO of IBM, who, when asked when he was taking over IBM for the first time now 15 or so years ago, how would things be different under his leadership? And he was very quick to say that there'll be no prizes for predicting rain, only for building arcs. And so I think the story behind that is all about accountability. It's really easy to focus on the problems, but it's really more about the solutions that we create. And ultimately, in this context of personal leadership or accountability, it's about the value that we create.
One of the things I so appreciate about your approach is that you have such a holistic perspective. And the notion that we're not different people when we're at work than we are at home, but to find that integrated approach to, I think it's partially about discovering who we really are, our true selves, and representing that in our daily lives.
Yeah, it's the congruence factor, as I have to talk about it in the congruence factor, in the context of being that person, kind of conducting myself or behaving. I think of it I often refer to it in the context of how am I showing up? How do I show up? So if I choose to be a leader, if my belief and value system says that I can be a leader and role model in every role that I play, then I need to be mindful of how am I showing up, because it's nice to say those things, but unless I'm really clear and deliberate about how I do that, I'm not as effective, and I'm not able to be that leader or have that level of congruence between what it is I say I stand for and what it is I do and how I show up when I'm not being deliberate about it.
So let's be candid about this. We all know leaders who do not hold the same point of view. And I'm going to say that for some of them, at least in the early stages, it's all about what you can do for me. And so do you run into that in your work, and how do you help leaders to realize that accountability starts with them?
Well, you're right. You're absolutely right. In fact, I see that as such a strong parallel to what gets in the way, because certainly a very key theme here, or linked to all of this from a business perspective, from a bottom line perspective, is the correlation to engagement. And I think in many ways that's why this whole idea, I think your first question was, have I seen an increase in this amount in the conversation around this topic? And yes, for sure. And I think one of the reasons is that more and more senior executives, more and more executives that I talk to are having this conversation because they're beginning to realize or acknowledge that there's a competitive advantage connected to all of this. And I think of organizations, market leaders like Aetna, People's Bank, Ritz-Carlton, Zappos, to name a few. They're wonderful examples of organizations that have been able to tap into this whole accountability and engagement realm to drive competitive advantage. And so I think in many ways it's that role model, to that point, it's that leader realizing that he or she sets the tone. And now you got me thinking about another one of my favorite quotes by Albert Schweitzer, who once said that example is not the main thing in influencing others, it's the only thing. And I often share that quote in my work with leaders at all different levels to remind them that one of the critical facts or truths about leadership is that it can be and should be a means or a pathway for inspiring the kind of behavior that we wish to see in others. It's about us as leaders setting the pace for that and acknowledging that everything we do at all times is about sending a message and really about speaking volumes about who we are as leaders, what we stand for as leaders. And the fact remains that how we set that tone has a tremendous impact on our team and ultimately how engaged they are or what level of accountability they're demonstrating.
I see this over and over. We're about to go to break here, but I did want to mention that Patrick Lencioni, who wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, has written a book recently called The Advantage. And he says a healthy organization where people have this kind of trust and accountability is the last competitive advantage that we have in the marketplace. So, David, we're going to ask you to hold on just a second. We're going to come back and talk about the factors that drive accountability when we return.
There's more to come with Catherine and her guests on Uncommon Sense for Leaders. Catherine returns after this short break.
In today's business world, a helping hand or idea that doesn't come with an invoice is a treasured find. And if that happens to you, then you need to pay it forward to keep other entrepreneurs from making mistakes or getting a raw deal. It's called Paying It Forward with Josephine Girassi, Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. Central. Josephine is going to have the guests describe their accomplishments, the lessons they've learned, both good and bad, and then sharing those pieces of knowledge as we create a movement of paying it forward. For more information about Josephine, her business, and background, you can go to mymomknowsbest.com. Josephine Girassi has always been a problem solver. She saw this need and has turned it into a movement. It's Paying It Forward, with tips, tools, and advice and hard lessons learned. These pieces of knowledge can make a huge difference for you, your business, and others. So join us for Paying It Forward with Josephine Girassi, Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m., 9 a.m. Central on TogiNet.com.
This is the All Business Radio Network, ABRN.
If you're ready for a big change in your work, your career, your happiness, your life, it's time for the $1 Million Mindset with Marla Tabaka. Monday afternoons at 2, 1 Central on TogiNet.com. Marla believes that with the right mindset, anything is possible. Join us as successful life coach Marla Tabaka inspires you and her clients to explore, discover, and live your dreams by developing what she calls the $1 Million Mindset. Marla will inspire you to take action on your dreams and reveal secrets to success that will help you realize your own unique power. Tune into the $1 Million Mindset for heartwarming stories with Marla Tabaka. Learn tips and tricks to building a successful business and unlock the secrets to creating a happier, more balanced life through abundant thinking and attraction power. For more information on the $1 Million Mindset, go to our website, marlatabaka.com. That's MarlaTabaka.com. It's the $1 Million Mindset with Marla Tabaka. Monday afternoons at 2, 1 p.m. Central on TogiNet.com.
You're listening to Uncommon Sense for Leaders, a forum for exploring leadership from the intellect, the heart, and the spirit. Here with more thought-provoking ideas on every aspect of leadership, Catherine Carlisi.
What value does it create? What value do I bring to the equation? And again, kind of piggybacking on the idea of that leadership applies beyond the workspace. That's value that I'm bringing in any of the roles that I play. So I think it starts with that. Clearly, integrity is a big part of it, realizing the critical need to add value and to do the right thing. But I think motivation and commitment and flexibility, resilience, let's be really candid there. Resilience is such a key part of it. Things are changing so rapidly. The pace of change, as you see in your work, I see in my work, I think all of our listeners see as well, is just accelerating. And so, and come from that comes a certain amount of ambiguity, and that resilience allows us to be able to respond to that in a positive way and not be derailed or sidetracked from it. So I think those are some others. Those are some key, but I think confidence and initiative would be part of it. I think courage, that's an interesting thought or concept, having courage in this, and that courage is navigating the unknown, navigating the ambiguity. I think that those are all parts of what really kind of gets behind that. But it starts there with that self-awareness, and I think, linking it even now into emotional intelligence, the self-regulation too, being mindful of that. And again, back to the behavior point, how we're showing up. Those are all some of the things that I think really, really contribute to it.
David, I would say resilience, courage, all those things are emotional intelligence attributes, things that we develop. And when I think about those words, I think about how important it is to have trust in an organization, because it's much easier to have courage, to be willing to take appropriate risks, to have some resilience when things don't go well, if you trust in the people around you. Would you agree with that?
For sure. It's a foundational part of it. It's a foundational part of what drives that accountability, of what drives the engagement. You've seen many of the studies, as I have, from the Gallup organization and Mercer and some of the other large global concerns who do studies, research on this topic, and again, the trust factor comes up. In fact, I was just reading, I did a speech on engagement at a conference a couple months back. I was doing a lot of research for it and poring over a lot of studies. And again, one of the things that the various concerns or consulting firms agreed to in their research was that trust amongst the leaders was such a key driver of this. In fact, I think in all the cases it was in the top 3 in terms of the drivers. And then just a week ago, I saw a new study that was released by, I believe it was Dale Carnegie Training. They had put out a study on engagement, and once again they showed up that idea of trust in the immediate manager. And I think that came out of one of the studies too, another one of the Gallup poll, Gallup organization research projects from a year ago, that trust in leaders at all levels is very important, critically important. But chief among that whole factor of trust and the driver of this was trust in one's immediate manager.
Yeah, absolutely.
So trust plays
and
role.
Speaking of the manager's role, I think one of the things that can get in the way is that a manager is afraid to hold people accountable because he or she doesn't want to be thought of as a micromanager. Have you run into that? I have.
Yeah, they don't want. I think one of the barriers that I see, and that certainly is a barrier, is that on part of the manager or leader at any level is the understanding that it really starts with them. And so back to that idea of being the role model for it, but also realizing that there's that balance between holding people accountable and being able to ensure that the job gets done and still maintain that trust. Because to your point, I've had this conversation with leaders, some as recently as a few weeks ago, who are concerned that if they're asking their teams to do more and more and more and more, and they're fearful that they're getting them to a point where they're going to, lose their feeling or bearings around where are they going, where do they fit in the organization, will they still like them? And I run into that on occasion. But I think in many ways it's a critical part or key part of what the leader needs to do, and to establish that accountability and help people to understand, what are those expectations. And I think in some ways, and I've seen this again and again over the years, that lack of clarity around what those expectations are is another barrier to achieving that accountability. People want to know they want to know what's expected of them, and that was interestingly one of the links to that most recent, I believe it was the late 2013 survey that came out from Gallup, that yes, while at the top of the list was trust in the person's immediate manager and then trust in other leaders in the organization, following that was clarity around what's expected. And people want to know at any level of the organization what's expected of me, and how does my work contribute to the greater good of the organization or the work that we do. And so I think that's kind of the transition point, if you will, or the balance, if you will, in that place where the leader is not sure of where that line is. I think if it's put in the context of the clarity of expectations and the greater good or purpose that's in part of that job or the individual's responsibility, I think it goes a long way in helping people to bridge that and as a result feel a little bit more connected to it.
I agree. Again, I was following some blogs, and the Crucial Skills people, I don't know if you follow theirs, but they have some very good articles from time to time. Mm-hmm. And this Al Switzler, Switzler, had written something in 2004 that I thought was very relevant for what we were talking about today. And he says exactly what you say: excellent performance begins with clear expectations. Mm-hmm. But when he goes into this piece about helping leaders feel more comfortable about holding people accountable, I'd like to read a couple paragraphs.
Please.
We talk a lot about what is the story we're telling ourselves, so we don't react directly to what we see or hear, but to the meaning we make out of it, and that creates the feelings that either support us or make it more difficult for us to take the actions that we want. But what Al Switzler says is too often people tell themselves that if they confront someone, the person will see it as micromanaging, and he calls it a sucker's choice, a choice where we see only two options, both of them bad. For example, if I confront people, they'll see it as being on their case. I've certainly heard that. Sure. Or I cannot confront them and let the results suffer. In reality, there's often a third, better alternative. You can confront the issue of accountability and not micromanage the situation. So you mentally push yourself to find the and. So instead of either or, we're going to move into how can both of these be true? Mm-hmm. How can I confront the issue so the results are achieved and avoid having the other person think I'm micromanaging? In fact, how can I deal with performance issues and strengthen our relationship? That's huge when it comes to holding people accountable. So then you have to focus on what you really want for you, for the other person, mm-hmm. and for the relationship. So you're not choosing one or the other. When you can do this well, you send a message that says, I've noticed this and I'm interested in learning what happened. I have not prejudged you or the issue. And that's key, I think. Sure. Also, when you have an agreement up front about how accountability discussions will be held, there are no surprises. I say this to everybody I work with. Set the expectations of how you're going to manage this kind of conversation before it ever comes up. So with no surprises and a lot of safety, holding talks about performance is not seen as micromanaging. What do you think about that?
Well, terrific insight. I really like it a lot. And I think part of what that speaks to is this belief that I have around the need to create a common language around it. And that common language allows the leader to take it out of that personal context, because when they're doing it in that context, that the kind of the first two examples there, taking it in that either or kind of scenario, what happens is there's that sense that it's a personal attack on the person, right? And so they're taking it out of this personal context and with this common language that speaks to, here's why we're doing it. Here's the value that this accountability creates for all the people in the equation. And I think that's it's a missing link that, frankly, I see in a fair number of organizations. I think every organization I work with, every leader I talk to, they get the idea that, yes, this whole idea of accountability and engagement can, and it often is, when done right, part of what creates the competitive advantage. But where I think sometimes they come up short is that failure to have a common language around why is this important. And that common language, I think it starts there, by the way, but then it also continues to a place that identifies what are the behaviors that demonstrate this. So I think of the why behind it, of why is it important, why do we need to do this, but also what value does it create, not just for my various stakeholders, but also for the individual. And I think that's part of that common language, and then being able to take it that step further to build clarity with this common language around here's what it looks like. You've seen it in your work, Catherine, as I have in conversation after conversation with leaders about, what they stand for, or what the core values of the organization are. And they're terrific words on paper, or on some other medium. But the truth of the matter is, unless people are really clear about how you live those, around what those behaviors are, they're only words. And so
That's right.
Part of that language, I think, part of the common language has
We're going to go into a break now, David. Sorry, I'm going to have to step in here.
Yeah,
but I would
please.
love to talk more about this when we get back. How to promote accountability and what gets in the way. Is that good? We'll talk about that more when we come back from the break.
Great, thanks.
There's more to come with Catherine and her guests on Uncommon Sense for Leaders. Catherine returns after this short break.
Are you looking for something more in your life or business? More success, more stability, more happiness? It's all out there waiting for you, but it doesn't just happen. You've got to go get it. Make it happen with Michelle McCullough, where motivation and strategy intersect. Michelle is a serial entrepreneur, acclaimed speaker, and the Woohoo Radio Network's resident business and success strategist. Michelle has the smarts, strategies, and experience to help you improve your life and take your business to the next level. You've got big dreams. You've got big vision. Now it's time for you to make it happen.
You're listening to Uncommon Sense for Leaders, a forum for exploring leadership from the intellect, the heart, and the spirit. Here with more thought-provoking ideas on every aspect of leadership, Catherine Carlisi.
Have you ever wondered if you're normal? Or why you feel distant from your partner? Then join us for Sex Talk with Lou, with your host Lou Paget, on TogiNet Wednesday nights 9/8 Central. Do you want to recreate a truly connected relationship? Or wonder, how do I tell my kids about things? Join Lou Paget, one of the world's best-selling authors in the field of sexuality, a certified sex educator and sought-after expert for all media, and her renowned expert guests as they discuss anything and everything about sex that impacts our lives and our families' lives. For more on Lou, check out her website, loupaget.com. This is the show where the best experts in the field of sexuality and sexual health can finally give you the answer to that question. Join us for Sex Talk with Lou, with your host Lou Paget, Wednesday nights at 9/8 Central on TogiNet.com.
You're listening to Uncommon Sense for Leaders, a forum for exploring leadership from the intellect, the heart, and the spirit. Here with more thought-provoking ideas on every aspect of leadership, Catherine Carlisi.
Topic in business today, which is accountability, how it relates to employee engagement, and most importantly, to results. So, David, thanks for being with us today, and welcome back.
Thank you.
So we were talking about some of the challenges that a leader might face when they're trying to help their team become more accountable. And I will tell you that I'm working with an organization who has appropriately identified this as number one topic for the coming year. And one of the things that I realize is that, as we talked about earlier, accountability starts with being very clear on expectations. And then from there, having people understand how what they do really makes a difference. And also the what consequences are there when people are not accountable. So I want to take just a minute, if you don't mind, before we go back into this, to talk about a tool that I use and recommend a lot. And it just helps to create a cadence of accountability where you have a monthly check-in with your employees. Now, some of my clients call it the RAP process, review, analyze, and plan. Some of them call it the SOC process, stay on course. And it's based on the notion, I think it was Tony Robbins who first said, that when a plane goes from New York City to California, they're really off course most of the time. I don't know if you knew that. I didn't.
Know.
And how do they end up where they're supposed to be at around the time they're supposed to be there is frequent course corrections. If they wait too long, they're going to be so far off course that it's going to take heroic efforts to get them back on track. I think it's very similar in business. So if we have that at least a monthly meeting, and it's not just a progress meeting, that's very, very different. This one talks about celebrations so that we start to promote that resilience and that pride in accomplishment. Also talks about what were the 3 to 4 significant commitments that were made in the last period. And let's report on whether you were successful in accomplishing those, what got in the way, what new learning was involved in that. So it becomes professional development. It becomes a way for the leader and his or her direct reports to really keep connecting in an important way to build that success coach relationship. And I think knowing that you're going to have to report at a certain time and you're going to have to, say I did it or I didn't, first of all, helps you be more attuned to staying on track. But secondly, gives you opportunities to really brainstorm. How could this have happened better? What did I not know that I know now? Those are all the kinds of things I think that can get left by the wayside when we're really busy, but really help individuals and organizations continually grow and become better. So that's what I wanted to share. Do you do something similar with your clients?
I do. I'm loving it, by the way. So I use navigating as a central theme because of my 2 books, and I do a compass calibration activity with leaders, and I have them use it, and some of them use it on a monthly basis, some quarterly, but the idea is very parallel, very much the same, in that we acknowledge that what we started off with, and we'll use it in the context of the monthly goals, we start off at the beginning of the month with this direction that we're taking, and we know that there are things that are going to come up, some that are predictable, some that are unpredictable, that get us off course a little bit. And so the idea is, and there are factors beyond the scope of our control to some degree as well that get us off course a little bit, like the example of the plane from coast to coast. And so in that scenario, what happens is we have these check-ins, and I use the compass again as a frame of reference, and we call it our compass calibration. So we're adjusting it. So we started off and said, well, this is where we need to be at the end of this month or at the end of this quarter, and now or at the end of the year, really. It begins in many cases. It's about where we're going for the year. And now we look at this quarterly check-in or monthly check-in and say, what's gotten in the way? Where are we right now in terms of in relationship to where we said we were going to be at this point? And in part of that is asking some of those same questions. What are we doing well? What's gotten in the way? What were the things that have come up that we didn't anticipate? How do we prevent that in the future or be better prepared for that? And ultimately, how have things changed in terms of who's doing what's working well, what could we be doing better, et cetera. And so it kind of reframes and recalibrates the compass so that it keeps us on that continual path that's aligned with where we need to get to for our ultimate destination, year-end progress, year-end success, whatever it may be. And there's a lot, I find, and I'm sure you do too, based on the way you describe the process with your clients, it's a tremendously helpful, valuable drill because there's, as you know, things change. And oftentimes what we start off with for goals, I have several things already booked as part of an annual routine with clients where we have these meetings late December, early December into late January, and we're mapping out the new year. And so we have our GPS kind of set in our map for the year, but we know that there's going to be things that come up that take us off that course. And so the way we keep on that course is to do these compass calibrations, or as in your example, these check-ins.
Yeah, I think it's great. Well, the other thing I like about the metaphor of course corrections is because there's no judgment in there. Mm-hmm. It's more neutral. Yeah. And that's so key, because one of the things that I encourage everybody to do is to think of themselves as managing the talent and trying to optimize the talent that's on their team.
Yeah.
And to do that, we need to keep people feeling resourceful and resilient.
And appreciated and valued and respected.
Yep,
right?
I agree.
Yeah, it's a big part of it.
It doesn't cost anything. It's the most overlooked, valuable, and cheap way of really bringing out the best in people.
It's a big part.
We were talking before we went into break. I'm sorry, I just talked over you. Were you going to say something?
No. I was acknowledging your point.
Thank you. We were talking about some of the things that get in the way of accountability. And one that I have seen is when people use that word as a hammer. They hit people over the head with this notion of, you've got to be accountable, which means you've got to take responsibility or accept blame. And those are so different in my mind from accountability. Would you talk about that with your experiences, David?
Yeah. It's interesting that you raised the issue of the hammer. I'm laughing in part because I had a conversation about this with a client it was just before Thanksgiving, several weeks ago. And in her organization, she's the head of a medium-sized organization here in the Hartford area, and in her role there's a lot of things that are happening because of the industry they're in, and there's been some major changes. They had an acquisition that they did earlier this particular calendar year, and as a result, there's a whole lot of new expectations to make that acquisition a home run. And so just recently, as I said, just several weeks ago, we were having a conversation around how the bar has been raised for her as the division leader, and now how she has to raise the bar on everyone else. And she made reference to, at one time it was kind of like the country club setting. They had a terrific history of success. They were very, very profitable. People just did what they had to do, and they got things done, and they enjoyed a very high level of success quarter after quarter. And now the competition in their market is very, very strong. It's very different, and as a result, they've been diversifying and to the point where they acquired another company. Well, in this conversation, she said, I feel like I have to go around with the hammer and remind people that we've got to get these things done, and everybody has to step up. And I said, so what's wrong with that? And she said, well, I've gone from being kind of like, the leader that has that leads this family, kind of like the matriarch of the organization, and now I'm walking around with the hammer, and it just doesn't feel right. And I said, well, you have to help people understand why these expectations have changed, and here's the opportunity to communicate this and back to that common language, to create this common language of why these expectations are happening, why it shifted, and what the opportunity is within these new expectations for everybody to continue to be successful. And so, at first glance, she was kind of thinking that, well, okay, I have to be a lot more serious and get people to step up at a higher level, and that just kind of feels awkward because we've had a very different relationship, and I don't really like being the hammer. But I said, well, it starts with the expectations that shifted for you as the senior leader, and what are you doing in response? You're stepping up, and so that's what's going to help drive the success of your division. And it requires everyone to step up at a similar level. So I think after that conversation and a few others that we've had since then, she's feeling a little bit less like the hammer and more like the leader that needs to define reality. And that reality is our market has changed significantly, And in order to maintain the success that we've enjoyed for so very long, we need to do things a little bit differently.
Yes. And certainly when you have an acquisition in play, you are dealing with a lot of unknowns. One of the things that I hear when I was listening to you is her concern that she has to become, that micromanager. Mm-hmm. And what she may be overlooking is that this relationship that she and the team have built for so many years could really be a great asset in not necessarily going all the other direction, but to have that reality check conversation that you're talking about, to understand that we have to step it up, we have to do things differently. We're changing our culture, but the most important elements will remain. We've got 1 minute before break, David. What would you say to that?
I'd say that there's a great opportunity in demonstrating accountability. I think I often refer to it as the accountability opportunity, and that is helping people to acknowledge that anything and everything they encounter in their work and their response to it defines who they are. And so I think that considering that every one of those changes in work, every one of those new demands, every one of those new expectations are all defining moments that help to define who we are and clearly influence our reputation. But I'd also like to have people consider 3 questions that I often ask my clients.
Hold on, don't ask them yet. We're going to come back from break in 5. We're leaving for break in 5 seconds. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
There's more to come with Catherine and her guests on Uncommon Sense for Leaders. Catherine returns after this short break.
If you're ready for a big change in your work, your career, your happiness, your life, it's time for the $1 Million Mindset with Marla Tabaka. Monday afternoons at 2, 1 Central on TogiNet.com. Marla believes that with the right mindset, anything is possible. Join us as successful life coach Marla Tabaka inspires you and her clients to explore, discover, and live your dreams by developing what she calls the $1 Million Mindset. Marla will inspire you to take action on your dreams and reveal secrets to success that will help you realize your own unique power. Tune into the $1 Million Mindset for heartwarming stories with Marla Tabaka. Learn tips and tricks to building a successful business and unlock the secrets to creating a happier, more balanced life through a banking and attraction power. For more information on the $1 Million Mindset, go to our website, marlatabaka.com. That's MarlaTabaka.com. It's the $1 Million Mindset with Marla Tabaka. Monday afternoons at 2, 1 p.m. Central on TogiNet.com.
This is the All Business Radio Network, ABRN.
In today's business world, a helping hand or idea that doesn't come with an invoice is a treasured find. And if that happens to you, then you need to pay it forward to keep other entrepreneurs from making mistakes or getting a raw deal. It's called Paying It Forward with Josephine Girassi, Wednesday mornings at 10, 9 a.m. Central. Josephine is going to have the guests describe their accomplishments, the lessons they've learned, both good and bad, and then sharing those pieces of knowledge as we create a movement of paying it forward. For more information about Josephine, her business, and background, you can go to mymomknowsbest.com. Josephine Girassi has always been a problem solver. She saw this need and has turned it into a movement. It's Paying It Forward with tips, tools, and advice and hard lessons learned. These pieces of knowledge can make a huge difference for you, your business, and others. So join us for Paying It Forward with Josephine Girassi, Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m., 9 a.m. Central on TogiNet.com.
You're listening to Uncommon Sense for Leaders, a forum for exploring leadership from the intellect, the heart, and the spirit. Here with more thought-provoking ideas on every aspect of leadership, Catherine Carlisi.
Hello and welcome back. Today we're with David O'Brien, President of Work Choice Solutions. David, you've given us some great thoughts on accountability today. And I know you want to talk about the accountability opportunity, some strategies that your most successful clients use. And also, at the end, you're going to give people 3 questions to ask themselves to do a little assessment of their own accountability levels. But before we start into that, we were talking about some of the things that could get in the way. And you told us a story about a client who, like many that I'm going to say, have experienced a big change in what their work experience is like based on the marketplace and changing industries, changing economic times. And so where you could have a very collegial, family-like atmosphere, that you want to still maintain that, but take it up a couple notches so that performance is an even greater focus. One of the things that we talked about was that collegial attitude, or getting along, how we get along is a very important aspect of our culture, can at some level get in the way of promoting accountability. Would you speak to that and how we can overcome that potential obstacle?
Yeah, terrific insight or question. I was beginning point. I think it's important to start or to begin by acknowledging that that's real, that's normal, that exists. And I think in some cases it does become a self-imposed barrier that leaders encounter because of that. They've got this history, like the example of the client who was afraid she was being the hammer. But I think if you acknowledge that as being normal and real, and then realize, I think as a second kind of consideration, that these are these external factors that are driving this need for a higher level of accountability, that I often think of it in the context of internal or external factors. And those external factors, like the competition in the field, in the particular industry, like the recent acquisition, those help to remove the personal context of it. And so, like you do, I do a lot of work also around organizational change, and I'm often struck by the fact that where people get stuck with some of that is that personal context of it. So here's that senior leader who wants to have that collegial relationship with her team that she's had and enjoyed for so long, and now it's a very different playing field that they're competing on, and so these expectations have changed, and the accountability bar just got raised a whole bunch. And one of the things that I shared with her was, this is not you sitting around saying, I'm going to make their lives difficult. This is not about you having a Department of Employee Complication where we're going to look at making people's lives complicated. This is about you responding to these external factors where you are, as the senior person, given this choice of how you respond to them. And the way you're responding to them is keeping ahead of the competition and honoring the legacy that you've helped to build and creating this brighter future based on your strategic response to these factors. And part of that is everybody needing to step up because, again, it's a very different playing field. And so I think a big part of this is about removing that personal context of it. I think my sense, and I'd be curious to see if you've encountered this as well, because it sounds like you've certainly dealt with this issue on many levels as well. But I think in one of her great barriers there was feeling that it was about her doing these things to this great team that she's had the privilege of leading for a long time, and that it was her fault that she was asking them to step up. And one of the things that I tried to do there, and I think was successful at over several conversations, was removing that personal context of it that said, this is about, as an organization, you have choices in terms of how you respond to these market factors, and based on the best intelligence that you have available, yours and the executive team, this is the course you need to take. And part of that means everybody needs to step up a little bit and do more with less. And so I think that's a big part of it, getting beyond that personal context and looking at it in the context of the external factors versus the internal factors.
I agree that definitely looking at the stories we're telling ourselves is so important. And first of all, she's telling herself the story that somehow she's doing it to them.
Yeah.
But David, even if we look at the implied message that anybody's doing it to anybody,
that's exactly right.
It's open to question.
Yeah. You're so
when
right.
we feel that, we're more likely to respond as victims rather than taking charge and saying, this is the reality of life today for every organization.
Everybody, yeah.
And then to have your leader, for example, say, team, we've worked together over these years. We've got some new challenges. What are your thoughts on how we can approach this? And to keep that sense of congeniality, but focus it toward results. Yeah. And I think that, again, the story we tell ourselves that we can't ask people to be accountable and still have a good relationship is flawed.
What a great insight,
Look at it. Yeah. So you wanted to talk about the accountability opportunity and give us some strategies that your clients use. Let's do that, because I want to make sure we have time for your 3 questions. So
Great, thank you. So I talk about it in the context of accountability, the accountability opportunity, because it is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to step up and to manage our reputation, and I think that's really a big part of it. And so I tell the story of I was working with a high potential group, back over the summer, and I had to use PowerPoint, and they wanted me to use PowerPoint, and I was trying to create something that would be appealing to this group, and so I happened to be looking at some clip art and some signs, and I saw this warning sign. It said, "Warning, changed priorities ahead." And I threw it into the PowerPoint deck, and I asked the question, what's the opportunity in this sign? Well, there was a lot of good discussion, but we didn't get exactly where I was planning to go with it or where I intended to go with it. But so we did. We jumped into it, and I said, every one of us is dealing with changed priorities. Welcome to the world of 2014 and beyond. This is the norm. But the opportunity that lies here is how we respond, because every single response we make or every response that we take is defining who we are. They are defining moments. And in those defining moments, we're making a choice, whether we realize it or not, that determines how we're defined. And so what I call it the accountability opportunity, because demonstrating accountability at a high level consistently goes a long way in building our brand and helping us to be successful. And I think that's the case for it. That's really the case for it. That's where the opportunity lies.
It's a new world, and it's calling for new skills and new perceptions.
Yeah.
And, there's a book, and I've heard people say this a lot recently, what got you here won't get you there.
Marshall Goldsmith. Yeah, terrific.
There you go.
Yeah. It's a whole new story. Yeah, I was reading an article the other day, and it was talking about this, and it said, because of these rapid changes in the not-too-distant future, there will be 2 types of executives, retired or on the leading edge. And I thought, okay, it's about being on the leading edge. It's about being out in front with this leadership and with this whole idea of engagement and accountability. I think that's a good insight. It's a good reminder for all of us. We need to adapt. We need to respond, regardless of our role in the organization. It takes leadership and it takes accountability.
When you talk about that kind of approach, it reminds me of something I read many years ago and still laugh about, is we need to develop the ability to see around corners.
Yeah.
So did you want to talk about the strategies that your successful clients use? Anything more about that before we go on to your 3 questions?
Well, I think one of a few things that come to mind in terms of what drives it at a high level in organizations that I work with is I think there's a very strong partnership between the CEO and the HR team. In many cases, the CEO is the sponsor, but the HR team are the architects of these types of initiatives. And I think there's that clear language, common language around the accountability. And then, beyond that, it's also about helping people understand the value that it creates across the organization, both internally and externally. So I think that those are some of the things that the clients that I work with who've really got this figured out and are doing it at a very high level. Those are some of the common denominators that come to mind.
Great. So tell us the 3 questions. I think this is, we always love to leave our listeners with something, an action that they can take to help themselves become even better at what they do.
Terrific. 3 questions that I ask my clients to consider when we have this conversation. Number 1, how would my key stakeholders describe my current level of accountability? Number 2, what value would a higher level of accountability create for me, starting with me, and my other key stakeholders? And then number 3, what is one thing that I can do today to demonstrate a higher level of accountability in any part of my work? So, want me to give you the 3 again?
Yeah, that'd be great.
How would my key stakeholders, number 1, how would my key stakeholders describe my current level of accountability? Number 2, what value would a higher level of accountability create for me and my key stakeholders? And then number 3, what is one thing that I can do today to demonstrate a higher level of accountability in any part of my work.
I like it.
Take the time to think about those, and you're honest, and you really give yourself permission to reflect on them and consider those responses, you'll have somewhat of an idea. I think you'll have the beginning of an action plan to get a higher level of accountability. And you might take some time and share that first question with others. How would my stakeholders describe my current level of accountability? With a trusted friend or colleague, people on the call here, people on the show today could ask that question of some of their trusted colleagues. Hey, how would you describe my level of accountability? And I think the answers would be very, very revealing.
Thank you so much, David. I think it takes courage to ask people, how am I doing? How do you think I'm doing? But the stakeholders, the people who have something to gain or lose by their interactions with us, can be wonderfully enlightening for us in understanding what we do that's really working and what needs work. So we're going to close the show now, but I want to invite everyone, if you want to learn more about David, his books, and the show, go to toginet.com, TOGINET.com/shows/uncommon sense for leaders. So David, it's been wonderful having you on the show. I know that accountability is a big topic, and thank you for helping us really give people some solid things to work on.
Thank you, Catherine. It was my pleasure. Great to be on the show again. Look forward to coming back sometime in the new year.
You can count on it. Thank you.
Right.
Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Uncommon Sense for Leaders, a forum for examining leadership from the perspectives of intellect, heart, and spirit. We're committed to bringing you the insights and information you need to take you from where you are to where you want to be as a leader. So we want to know more about you, our listeners. What did you learn on today's show that struck a chord with you?